Hello, everyone, and welcome to this time of Bible study. Happy Father's Day to all of you who are dads. This is a strange time for us in that we're not able to meet together to celebrate our dads. But dads, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I am praying for you and really admire and appreciate the job that you're doing as dads in your homes. We've been looking at the book of James for the past 5 weeks. We're going to finish up our study in James today. The year 2020 will no doubt go on record as one of the strangest years that any of us have lived through. Also one of the most stressful years. Seems like almost everyone you meet is just on edge. You see it when you're out and about. You see it in the way people drive. You definitely see it in the way people talk to one another on the internet. It seems like everybody just has a short fuse right now. A lack of patience. And you may be feeling that way too right now. And if you are, I want you to know that you are not alone. James, the author of our the Bible book that we're studying right now, James understood as well how difficult it is to control the things that we say. In fact, James speaks more about the use of speech as a part of Christian conduct. He says more than any other writer in the New Testament. He mentions speech in all 5 chapters of this brief epistle. So let's take a closer look at what James has to say today from chapter 3 on the subject of speech. And the title of this message is Watch What You Say. If you want to follow along at home with me in your Bibles, I'm going to be reading from James chapter 3, verses 2 through 10. All right, let's read together. James writes this: For we all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect person, able to bridle the whole body as well. Now, if we put the bits into horses' mouths so that they will obey us, we direct their entire body as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are so great and are driven by strong winds, they're still directed by a small rudder wherever the inclination of the pilot desires. So also the tongue is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts of great things. See how such a great forest is set aflame by a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, the very world of iniquity. The tongue is set among our members as that which defiles the entire body and sets on fire the course of our lives and is set on fire by hell. For every species of beast and birds, of reptiles and creatures of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by the human race. But no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil and full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse other people who have been made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth comes both blessing and cursing. My brothers and sisters, these things ought not be. All right, let's take a little more in-depth look at what James is saying here. The theme of that passage I just read is a very simple idea to grasp and to keep in mind as we work our way through it. And the idea is that words are small but powerful. He gives us 3 examples, verses 3, 4, and 5, of how little things can accomplish big things. Look at what he says in verse 3, for example. He gives us this example or this analogy of using a small bit that fits in a horse's mouth, using a small bit to control a great animal. The largest horse in the world today, at least according to what I was able to find on the internet, is a Shire horse by the name of Mammoth. He's 86 inches tall And he weighs over 3,300 pounds. And yet that gigantic horse, like any other horse, can be controlled by a bit of just a few inches placed in his mouth. And then in verse 4, James gives us the example of a giant ship controlled by a rudder. The ships in James's day were powered mostly by sails, although controlled by the rudders. Today we have gigantic, enormous seagoing vessels, ocean-going ships that weigh close to 30,000 tons. And yet those ships as well are controlled by a rudder that's roughly the size of my wife, about 5 feet tall. And then in verse 5, he gives us the example of a giant fire started by a small spark. And again, now remember, James is giving us an example of the power of small things. A small bit, a small rudder, and now a fire, a gigantic fire which can be started by a spark. Now here in California, we live through that every year as we approach fire season. We see gigantic fires which destroy hundreds and hundreds of buildings and houses and thousands of acres of land, and often even take human life. And typically they are started by a small spark or a cigarette or a match, something like that. So, in other words, little things have great power, or can have great power. Now in verse 5, James says the tongue is like that. Words are like that, small but powerful. And this can be for both good and bad. Think in human history what words have done to change the course of history. I'm thinking of things like the Magna Carta in England in 1215, which for the first time gave some rights not just to royalty but to ordinary people. Think of the Declaration of Independence here in the United States, or the U.S. Constitution. Think of the Emancipation Proclamation. Think of the Gettysburg Address. If I have a hero in this world, another person, it's Abraham Lincoln. He has been my hero since I was a teenage boy. And I was thinking again this week about the Gettysburg Address that Lincoln delivered when the battlefield at Gettysburg was being dedicated as a memorial park after that horrific battle where so many people, so many soldiers on both sides lost their lives. And as Lincoln addressed a nation torn by civil war, a nation in strife, over the course of just 272 words, that's all the Gettysburg Address is, 272 words. It takes about 2 minutes to read out loud. But Abraham Lincoln spoke of the dream of a new birth of freedom. And that a nation where government of the people, by the people, and for the people would not perish from the face of the earth. He captured that hope that still existed in America. You see, little words have the power to accomplish great things. It's also true in the negative sense. Adolf Hitler recorded his Nazi philosophy in a book he entitled Mein Kampf, My Story. Some historian has noticed or noted that for every word in that book, over 100 lives were lost in World War II. Words have the power to accomplish great things for good or for evil. Look at what James says in verse 8. He says the tongue is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. On verse 6, by the way, it just said that the tongue is like a fire that sets the body on fire. But now look at what he says in verse 8, that the tongue is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. Have you ever heard of the blowfish? Sometimes called the pufferfish. The fish contains a deadly poison that is 275 times more deadly than cyanide. And yet, people eat it, especially in Japan. Some people do anyway. The poison is contained in the ovaries, the skin, and the liver. And chefs who prepare it have to undergo a rigorous government program where they learn how to prepare it. Would you eat it if it was served to you? I don't think I would. And yet, people do, and every year in Japan, about 24 people die from eating parts of the blowfish where not all of the toxins were removed. Now, most people would never dream of serving that to their guests, for example. James wants us to ask ourselves the question, why would we be so casual about spreading poison with our tongues? Unkind words hurt. We teach our children that nursery rhyme, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me, or words will never hurt me. But that's not true at all, is it? Words hurt a great deal. Some of you may still be carrying emotional scars from words that were spoken to you as a child. And I feel that today, at more so than at any time in my lifetime, we have completely lost all sense of decency about the way we speak to one another. Look at how divided we are over politics in this country. There are families where family members who will not speak to each other because they have different political philosophies. Have we lost any understanding of how absurd that is, or how wrong that is? I see it all the time on the internet, for example, like on Facebook. Christian people who threaten to unfriend, if you don't know what that is on Facebook, to cut off someone because they don't agree with you politically. It's gotten to be absurd. Now, can you apply what James is saying here to your discourse, to the way you speak to other people, whether it's online or just in real life? Can you remind yourself that the tongue can be like a flame, a deadly flame that sets things on fire, and a deadly poison that destroys relationships and hurts other people? Can I remind you that you don't have to win every political argument? And sometimes it's okay to just say, well, we disagree, and let it go at that, and not lose a relationship over something like politics. You don't have to lose touch with people just because you don't agree with everything. And can I remind you that once your words are spoken, they can't be unspoken. That's what James means in verse 5 when he tells us that words are like a fire that burns down a forest. Once the forest is burned, it's done, it's gone. Once our words are spoken, we can't unspeak them. The most vivid example of that truth in the Bible is found in Genesis chapter 27. You may remember the story of the two brothers, the twins, Jacob and Esau. They were not identical twins physically. They were very different. Jacob was evidently a very fair person, very smooth skin, and Esau just the opposite, very coarse hair, very manly kind of man, always outdoors hunting. Jacob always indoors with his mother Rachel. And Rachel, the mom, and Jacob conspired. They hatched a plan to steal the blessing and birthright that belonged to Esau as the older brother. Even though they were twins, Esau was the one born first. By this time, their father, Isaac, was aged, in poor health. he was almost totally blind. And they realized, the mother and younger son did, that they could use that to their advantage. They could dress Jacob up like Esau, cover his arms with animal hair, make him smell like Esau, and trick Isaac into thinking that Jacob was Esau and give the blessing and birthright that belonged to the older son. And that's what they did. And Jacob went into the room, and Isaac even said, you sound like Jacob, but he felt his arms and said, no, I can tell you, you're Esau. And they completely tricked and deceived Isaac into giving the blessing that belonged to the older son to giving it to the younger son. And he did, and he spoke that word and blessed Jacob and gave him that birthright that was not his. Well, that part of the story didn't confuse me. I know that people can do all manner of evil things, but it's the part of the story that came next that always confused me. Once Isaac realized that he had been deceived and tricked into giving the blessing that didn't belong to Jacob, I always assumed that Isaac should have just said, well, no, I cancel what I say. I take it back because I spoke those words after being deceived. But Isaac didn't do that. In fact, he understood that the words had been spoken and they could not be retrieved. To those people, words were like arrows launched into the air, and once they were launched, they could not be retrieved. And it's that way with the words we speak. We can ask for forgiveness and be forgiven. But the damage that our words cause, it's already there. I always remember a little poem I heard when I was much younger about words. And it goes like this: boys flying kites pull in their white-winged birds, but this you cannot do when you're flying words. Thoughts unexpressed fall back dead, but God himself can't bring them back once they're said. Little words can cause great damage, so watch what you say. That's the theme of verses 7 through 10. I know it's difficult to do. It's difficult when you're hot and bothered and you're talking to someone else that's hot and bothered, and before you know it, words are exchanged, bitter words, insults are hurled and the like. It's difficult, but not impossible. Look at what James says in verse 7. He shows us how animals and birds can be tamed. Look at what he says. All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures have been tamed by mankind. I love to watch animal videos on the internet. Do you do that too? I could spend all day watching them. And I have seen videos of animals and birds that have been trained to do things that I just wouldn't have believed are possible. I saw a video of a cockatoo that can imitate Elvis Presley. And I saw a video of a dolphin that has been trained to count. I saw a video of a parrot that can say, "Hi, y'all," in a southern accent. And of course, we all know about Coco, the gorilla, who learned about 2,000 words in English and over 1,000 words in sign language. Now, in verse 7, James wants us to get the irony here. We can train animals to do all of these things, but yet we can't train ourselves in the way we speak. But of course, with God's help, we can exercise restraint and show good judgment when we speak. Make sure when you speak as a Christian, when you speak to other people, that you do it in a loving way. The gold standard here is from the Apostle Paul, book of Ephesians, chapter 4, verse 15, when Paul says to speak the truth in love. That's the gold standard for Christian speech. That's the golden rule applied to speech. I hear people brag all the time about how I tell it like it is. Well, that's not the Christian standard for speech. People boast about telling it like it is, as if they don't care at all how their words affect other people, the impact that their words have on other people. That's not how Christians should speak to other people. The Christian standard is Ephesians 4:15. Speak the truth in love. It's not enough to just speak the truth. Do it lovingly. You can use your words to encourage other people and not discourage them. You can use your words to bless other people, not to curse. The ability to use our words to convey our thoughts is one of the greatest gifts that God has given us, and is a gift that is really unique to human beings in the sense of actually expressing sentient thought. Use that gift wisely. Use it in a way that honors God. Use it in a way that blesses other people, that encourages other people. You can do that with God's help, and so can I. And I pray that you will pray right there where you are, that God will give you the strength today and tomorrow and throughout this week to use your words to be a blessing to other people. I'm so glad to have had this time to be with you as we wrap up our study in the book of James. I'm looking forward to being with you next Sunday. Until then, may God bless and keep you.